Jack Hunter leaned back in his pilot chair, staring at the endless sea of stars through his ship's window. The old bounty hunter had spent years chasing criminals, hunting down smugglers, and surviving in the cold, unforgiving void of space. But now he was done. Retired. His ship, the Vagabond, was his only companion, and he was planning to drift through the galaxy, free of danger and responsibility. At least that was the plan. As Jack sipped his bitter coffee, a loud beeping interrupted the silence. His console flashed red, signaling an incoming distress call. He frowned, his finger hovering over the ignore button. Distress signals often led to trouble, and trouble was the last thing he wanted. But something about the signal caught his attention. It wasn't a regular human transmission. The language was alien, garbled, and desperate. Curiosity won. Jack tapped the screen, and the static-filled message played. A hologram flickered to life in front of him, showing two beings that looked vaguely humanoid, but with shimmering, scaled skin and glowing blue eyes. They were clearly not from Earth. The male spoke first, his voice trembling. "Please, if anyone is out there, help us. They've taken our daughter. We'll give you anything. Anything you desire." The female stepped forward, her hands clasped tightly. "We don't have much time. She's just a child. If you can hear this, please, save her." Jack leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. He replayed the message, this time focusing on the background. The pair stood in a dimly lit room with strange symbols etched on the walls. It was hard to tell where they were, but the urgency in their voices was unmistakable. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Why me? Why now?" He muttered to himself. He had spent his whole life avoiding emotional entanglements. Taking a job like this, especially one with no guarantee of payment, was against every rule he'd ever made for himself. Yet, he couldn't shake the image of the parents' faces. The raw pain in their eyes reminded him of something he had buried deep in his memory, a loss he didn't like to think about. The distress signal included coordinates, leading to a remote sector of space. Jack hesitated for a long moment, staring at the blinking dot on his screen. He didn't know who these aliens were, what kind of trouble they were in, or whether he'd survive if he got involved. But something in his gut told him he couldn't ignore this one. "Fine," he grumbled, setting the ship's autopilot to follow the coordinates. "One last mission. Then I'm really done." Hours later, the Vagabond dropped out of hyperspace near a small battered ship. It was clearly the source of the distress call. Jack scanned the area for threats but found nothing unusual. He hailed the ship. "This is Jack Hunter aboard the Vagabond. I received your distress call. Do you copy?" The hologram reappeared on his console, showing the alien couple. Up close, their desperation was even more evident. The male introduced himself as Relic, and the female as Mira. They explained their story in broken English, their voices heavy with emotion. "Our daughter, Elena," Mira said, her glowing blue eyes welling up with tears. "She was taken by pirates, dangerous ones. They trade in lives." Relic added, his fists clenched. "They took her because of what she is. Our kind. We have abilities. She's young, but they'll try to use her powers for their greed." Jack frowned. "What kind of powers?" Relic hesitated before replying. "Our people can influence energy. It's hard to explain, but in the wrong hands, Elena could be a weapon. Please, you must help us." Jack crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. "And if I do, what's in it for me?" Relic gestured to Mira, who pulled out a small glowing crystal from a pouch. The light it emitted was mesmerizing, shifting colors like a living rainbow. "This," Mira said, holding it up. "It's a star crystal. It can power ships, heal injuries, or even extend life. It's priceless. It's yours if you save her." Jack studied the crystal, tempted but wary. He had seen enough scams in his time to know not to trust anything at face value. "How do I know you're not lying?" Relic stepped closer, his voice firm. "We don't lie, bounty hunter. Our daughter's life is worth more than any treasure. But if you don't believe us, leave. We'll find someone else." The plea hit Jack harder than he expected. He didn't know these people, and their daughter wasn't his responsibility. But deep down, he couldn't walk away. Not this time. He nodded slowly. "All right. I'll do it. But if I find out this is some kind of setup." "It's not." Mira interrupted, her voice cracking. "Thank you. Thank you for giving us hope." Jack stood and grabbed his gear, his heart heavy with the weight of what he was about to face. As he prepared to track the pirates, Relic's final words echoed in his mind. "Save our daughter, and we'll give you anything you desire." But Jack wasn't sure what he desired anymore, other than to survive this mission. The chase begins. The Vagabond hummed with the soft buzz of its engines as Jack set course for the asteroid station, where the pirates had last been spotted. The coordinates provided by Relic pointed to an abandoned mining colony in a desolate sector of space, a perfect hideout for criminals. Jack sat in his cockpit, scanning the data, his mind racing through possibilities. This wasn't the first time he'd gone after pirates, but something about this job felt different. Maybe it was the desperate look in Mira's eyes, or the haunting way Relic's voice cracked when he said his daughter's name. Jack didn't have kids of his own, but he could imagine the kind of fear that would drive parents to beg a stranger for help. He tightened his grip on the controls. "Focus, Jack," he muttered to himself. "Sentimental thoughts will get you killed." As the Vagabond approached the asteroid station, the image of it slowly came into view. The structure was massive but dilapidated, with broken scaffolding and jagged rocks encasing its perimeter like a skeletal hand. The station had long since fallen into disrepair, but faint lights flickered from its central hub, a sign of activity. Jack brought the ship to a halt just outside the station's sensor range. He activated his scanner, letting the ship sweep for any signs of life. The results came back almost instantly. Several dozen heat signatures inside, scattered throughout the station. "Definitely pirates," Jack muttered. He double-checked his gear. A plasma pistol holstered at his side, a combat knife strapped to his leg, and a portable EMP device tucked into his pack. He wasn't expecting a warm welcome. Switching to stealth mode, the Vagabond glided silently toward the docking bay. Jack landed without incident, his ship blending into the shadows. The docking bay was eerily quiet, with old crates and mining equipment strewn about. The air smelled of rust and stale oxygen. Jack stepped out cautiously, his pistol drawn. Every step echoed faintly, reminding him how vulnerable he was here. He wasn't sure what he'd find, but he wasn't leaving without answers. The station's corridors were a labyrinth of rusted metal and flickering lights. Jack moved silently, sticking to the shadows. The pirates hadn't bothered with maintenance. Doors hung off their hinges, wires dangled from the ceiling, and walls were covered in strange markings, possibly territorial claims or warnings. As Jack crept deeper into the station, he noticed something odd. Scorch marks lined the walls, and broken equipment lay scattered as if a fight had taken place. Cages, large, reinforced, and empty, stood in the corners of several rooms. Some were stained with what Jack hoped wasn't blood. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just a hideout. It was a trafficking operation. Then he heard it, a faint, muffled cry. Jack froze, his ears straining. The sound was faint, almost swallowed by the hum of the station's dying machinery. It came from the far end of the corridor. He moved quickly but carefully, his pulse quickening with every step. The cry grew louder, clearer. It wasn't just one voice. There were several, all pleading, all terrified. Jack reached a large room and peered inside. What he saw made his stomach churn. Dozens of captives, aliens of various species, were crammed into cages. Some were injured, others barely conscious. The air was thick with despair, but none of them matched the description of Elena. Jack scanned the room, his heart sinking. If Elena wasn't here, where was she? A sudden noise made him duck behind a crate. Heavy boots clanked against the metal floor as two pirates entered the room. They were large, brutish creatures with reptilian features and crude armor. One carried a shock baton, while the other held a datapad. "Shipment's ready," the first pirate growled. "Boss wants the special cargo prepped for transfer." Jack's ears perked up. Special cargo. That had to be Elena. He inched closer, keeping to the shadows. "She's in the lab," the second pirate replied. "They'll move her with the others once the buyer arrives." Jack clenched his fists. A buyer. That meant time was running out. He had to act fast. The pirates left, and Jack slipped into the room. The captive stared at him with a mix of fear and hope. "I'm not here to hurt you," he whispered. "I'm looking for a young girl, about this tall, blue eyes. Have you seen her?" One of the captives, a small alien with antennae, nodded weakly. "They took her to the lower levels. Said she's important." Jack nodded. "Hang tight. I'll come back for you." The alien's eyes widened. "Wait. The lower levels are dangerous. The pirates, they've got traps. Monsters." Jack didn't flinch. He'd dealt with worse before. "Thanks for the warning." As Jack made his way to the lower levels, the station grew darker and colder. The corridors were narrower here, the walls lined with strange alien machinery. He noticed movement up ahead, mechanical drones patrolling the area. He ducked into an alcove, letting them pass. Getting caught now wasn't an option. He finally reached a large, reinforced door. The words "restricted access" were scrawled across it in multiple languages. Jack hacked the door's control panel, his hand steady despite the tension. The door hissed open, revealing a room bathed in dim, green light. In the center of the room was a stasis pod, glowing faintly. Inside was a young alien girl, Elena. Her eyes were closed, her small form curled up as if she were asleep. Jack's heart sank. She looked so vulnerable, so alone. But before he could move, a voice boomed through the room. Well, it drawled. "What do we have here?" "A bounty hunter, sticking his nose where it doesn't belong." Jack turned to see the pirate captain standing on a platform above him, flanked by armed guards. The captain grinned, his sharp teeth gleaming in the low light. "You've made it this far," the captain said, "but this is where your journey ends." Jack tightened his grip on his pistol, his mind racing. The odds were stacked against him, but he wasn't about to back down. Not now. Into the trap. Jack stood in the dim green glow of the stasis pod, his pulse pounding in his ears. Elena lay inside, her small form encased in a shimmering energy field. She looked peaceful, but Jack knew it wasn't by choice. The pirate captain's voice echoed through the chamber, dripping with mockery. "You think you're clever, bounty hunter," the captain sneered from his elevated platform. "But you've walked right into my trap." Jack didn't reply. He was already scanning the room, calculating the odds. The platform above was lined with armed pirates, their weapons trained on him. The stasis pod was flanked by two towering mechanical sentinels, their glowing red eyes locked onto his every move. The only cover in the room was a cluster of storage crates near the far wall, but reaching them would be suicide. The captain chuckled. "Nothing to say. I thought bounty hunters had more fight in them." Jack smirked, masking the tension knotting in his chest. "Oh, I've got plenty of fight, just deciding if you're worth the effort." The captain's grin faded. Bold words for a dead man. "Take him." The guards moved first, fanning out to encircle Jack. The sentinels activated with a low hum, their massive limbs whirring to life. Jack acted on instinct, diving behind the nearest console as a barrage of plasma bolts rained down where he had been standing. Jack's mind raced as he crouched behind the console. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and had no clear escape route. But he wasn't about to give up. His hand went to the EMP device in his pack. It was his best shot at taking out the sentinels, but it had a limited range. He'd have to get closer. "Keep him pinned," the captain barked. "Don't let him near the pod." Jack peeked out, quickly assessing the guards' positions. They were spread out, their focus entirely on him. That gave him an idea. He reached into his belt and pulled out a smoke grenade, one of his last. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed it toward the center of the room. It landed with a clink, releasing a thick cloud of gray smoke. The room descended into chaos. The pirates fired blindly, their shouts echoing in the chamber. Jack used the cover to move, darting between shadows as he closed the distance to the pod. The sentinels, unaffected by the smoke, turned toward him, their sensors locking on. "Come on, big guys," Jack muttered, pulling out the EMP device. He activated it, a faint blue light pulsing from the small device. The sentinels lurched forward, their movements mechanical and deliberate. Jack waited until they were close, too close, then slammed the device onto the nearest one's chassis. The EMP discharged with a high-pitched whine. The sentinel froze, sparks flying from its joints before it collapsed in a heap of metal. The second sentinel hesitated, its systems briefly disrupted, giving Jack just enough time to grab his plasma pistol and fire a precise shot into its sensor core. The machine toppled, crashing to the ground. The smoke began to clear, revealing the carnage. The guards were disoriented, some coughing and others frantically trying to locate Jack. The captain roared in frustration, slamming his fist on the railing of his platform. "Useless fools. Kill him now." Jack didn't wait for them to regroup. He sprinted to the stasis pod, his fingers flying over the control panel. The interface was alien, covered in symbols he didn't understand. He growled in frustration, his fingers fumbling as he tried to decipher the controls. Behind him, the guards were closing in. He could hear their footsteps, their weapons charging. Time was running out. Then he saw it, a red button marked with an unfamiliar symbol, pulsing faintly. It looked like a release mechanism. Jack didn't hesitate. He slammed his fist onto the button. The stasis field flickered, then disappeared. Elena's eyes fluttered open, her glowing blue irises locking onto Jack. She looked terrified, but there was a spark of recognition. She knew he wasn't one of the pirates. "Can you walk?" Jack asked, his voice firm but gentle. Elena nodded weakly. Yes, I think so." "Good. Stay close." Jack pulled her behind him, shielding her with his body as the guards opened fire. He returned fire, his shots precise, taking down 2 of them in quick succession. But there were too many, and they were closing in fast. "Enough of this," the captain bellowed. He leaped down from the platform, landing with a heavy thud. In his hands, he held a massive energy blade, its edge crackling with raw power. He strode toward Jack with deadly intent, his eyes gleaming with malice. Jack gritted his teeth. He was low on ammo, out of grenades and out of time. He glanced at Elena, who was clutching his arm, her small frame trembling. "Stay behind me," he said, his voice low. "No matter what." The captain charged, swinging his blade in a wide arc. Jack dodged, the blade narrowly missing him and leaving a scorch mark on the floor. He fired his pistol, but the captain's armor absorbed the shots. The brute was fast for his size, and his strikes were relentless. Jack was running out of options. Then he remembered what Relic had said. "Our people can influence energy." "Elena," Jack said, ducking another swing. "Can you use your powers?" Elena hesitated, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know how." "You don't have to know. Just try." The captain lunged again, and Jack barely dodged in time. Elena closed her eyes, her hands trembling as she extended them toward the captain. A faint glow began to emanate from her palms, growing brighter and brighter. "What is this?" the captain growled, his movements slowing. Elena's glow intensified, and suddenly, a surge of energy erupted from her hands, slamming into the captain. He was thrown back, his blade clattering to the floor as he hit the wall with a deafening crash. Jack stared at Elena, impressed and relieved. "Not bad, kid." Elena looked at her hands in awe, then back at Jack. I didn't know I could do that." Jack smiled grimly. Good thing you did. The remaining guards, seeing their leader defeated, hesitated. Jack took the opportunity to grab Elena and make a run for the exit. The vagabond was waiting, but the station's alarm systems were blaring now. More reinforcements would be coming. As they sprinted through the corridors, Jack glanced at Elena. She was scared, but she was holding up. That was good. They'd need every bit of courage to survive what came next. Behind them, the captain's voice echoed over the intercom, filled with fury. You won't get away, bounty hunter. You can't escape me. Jack smirked, adrenaline pumping as they reached the docking bay. Watch me. The hidden base. The vagabond roared through the blackness of space, its engines pushed to their limits. Jack glanced at the navigation display, his jaw clenched. The coordinates he'd stolen from the pirate captain's terminal pointed to a remote sector near a black hole, a place where no sane person would venture willingly. But Jack wasn't feeling particularly sane after the chaos at the asteroid station. Behind him, Elena sat quietly in the co-pilot's seat, her wide, glowing eyes staring out at the stars. She hadn't said much since they escaped. The events of the last few hours had taken their toll, and Jack couldn't blame her. She was just a kid, thrown into a nightmare she didn't deserve. You okay back there? Jack asked, breaking the silence. Elena nodded but didn't meet his eyes. I'm fine, she said softly. Then, after a pause, he added, Thank you for saving me. Jack waved a hand dismissively. Don't thank me yet, kid. We're not out of this mess. That black hole isn't just scenery, it's a death trap. If the pirates are hiding near it, they've got more than just a good hiding spot. They've got defenses too. Elena looked at him, worry etched on her face. Are you scared? Jack snorted. Scared? Nah. Terrified? Yeah, maybe a little. That earned a faint smile from her, and Jack felt a small sense of relief. Humor was always a good way to cut through tension, even if he didn't feel as confident as he sounded. As they approached the coordinates, the black hole came into view. It was a monstrous, swirling void, its gravitational pull so strong that even light couldn't escape. Surrounding it was a glowing accretion disk, a fiery halo of gas and debris spiraling into oblivion. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Jack scanned the area, his fingers flying over the controls. The pirate's base was cloaked, hidden somewhere in the chaos of the black hole's gravity. His sensors were picking up faint energy signatures, but nothing definitive. Elena, Jack said, glancing at her, remember what your dad said about your powers? That you can influence energy. She nodded hesitantly. Yes, but I don't really know how. Well, now's a good time to figure it out. Can you? I don't know. Feel anything out there? Something unusual. Elena closed her eyes, her small hands resting on the console. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she opened her eyes, a spark of excitement in them. There, she pointed to a seemingly empty patch of space near the black hole's edge. Something's there. It feels wrong. Jack adjusted the ship's trajectory, heading toward the spot Elena indicated. As they drew closer, a massive structure materialized out of thin air, a sprawling station made of dark metal, its jagged edges glowing faintly with red light. The pirate base. Jack let out a low whistle. You've got a knack for this, kid. Elena smiled shyly, but her expression quickly turned serious. There are people in there, a lot of them, and they're scared. Jack's grip on the controls tightened. Then we'd better hurry. The vagabond docked in a shadowed alcove on the station's outer edge. Jack stepped out first, scanning for any signs of patrols. The air was thick and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang. The base was massive, with narrow corridors lit by dim, flickering lights. Jack motioned for Elena to stay close. Stick with me, he whispered, and keep your powers ready. We might need them. They moved through the corridors, avoiding patrols and automated sentries. Jack's every step was calculated, his senses on high alert. Elena followed silently, her glowing eyes darting around nervously. The deeper they went, the more unsettling the base became. The walls were covered in strange symbols, etched in what looked like blood. Rooms they passed contained disturbing experiments, half-dismantled robots, fused with organic parts, tanks filled with unidentified alien creatures, and charts displaying incomprehensible data. Jack's stomach churned. "This isn't just a pirate base," he muttered. "This is a lab. They're experimenting on people." Elena shivered. "Why would they do that?" "Power," Jack said grimly. "Always comes down to power." They finally reached the central chamber, a massive room dominated by a towering device that pulsed with energy. Dozens of captives were held in cages along the walls, their faces pale and hollow. In the center of the room was a containment field, and inside it was the glowing crystal the pirates had stolen. A star crystal, just like the one Relic and Mira had offered. Jack's gut told him that wasn't just any star crystal. The way it pulsed, the way the entire room seemed to hum in response, it was connected to something bigger, something dangerous. Before Jack could analyze further, a voice boomed through the chamber. "You've come far, bounty hunter." The pirate captain stepped into view, flanked by heavily armed guards. His armor gleamed under the pulsating light, and his expression was one of pure malice. "You think you can waltz into my base and steal from me? You're a fool." Jack raised his pistol, his gaze steady. "You've got something that doesn't belong to you. A lot of some things, actually. Let them go, and I might let you walk out of here." The captain laughed, a deep, menacing sound. "Bold of you to make threats, especially here, in my domain." He snapped his fingers, and the room erupted into chaos. Guards poured in from every entrance, weapons drawn. The containment field flickered, and the star crystal's glow intensified, bathing the room in a blinding light. Jack grabbed Elena and ducked behind a console as plasma bolts flew past them. "Stay down," he shouted. "This is going to get messy." Elena clutched his arm, her voice trembling. "Jack, the crystal. It's alive. I can feel it." Jack risked a glance at the glowing artifact. "Alive? What does that mean?" Before Elena could answer, the crystal pulsed again, and a shockwave rippled through the room. The guards staggered, some falling to the ground. Jack felt a strange energy course through him, like a static charge under his skin. Elena's eyes widened. "It's waking up. We have to stop it." The monster and the revelation. The shockwave from the star crystal rattled the chamber, sending Jack and Elena stumbling to the ground. Sparks erupted from nearby consoles, and a low mechanical hum filled the air. The energy radiating from the crystal was almost palpable, making the hairs on Jack's arms stand on end. "Elena, stay close," Jack barked, pulling her behind a toppled crate as another wave of energy surged outward. The guards weren't so lucky. Several were thrown back like ragdolls, crashing into walls, and collapsing in heaps. From across the room, the pirate captain stood, unfazed by the chaos. His sharp grin widened as he gestured toward the crystal. "You see now, bounty hunter. This is no ordinary artifact. This is the key to a power far beyond anything you can imagine." Jack peeked over the crate, his jaw tightening. "Yeah, power like that usually comes with strings attached. What's it going to cost you?" The captain's smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Enough talking. You'll die before you can meddle any further. Bring it out." Jack frowned. "Bring what out?" A deafening roar shattered the air, shaking the chamber to its core. Jack turned, his eyes widening as a massive door slid open at the far end of the room. From the shadows emerged a hulking creature, a grotesque amalgamation of metal and flesh. Its body was covered in thick, armored plating, and its glowing red eyes scanned the room with predatory intent. The creature let out another bone-rattling roar and charged forward, its claws ripping through the floor as it closed the distance. The fight for survival. Jack grabbed Elena and dove out of the way as the creature's claws smashed into the crate, reducing it to splinters. He rolled to his feet, firing his plasma pistol at the beast. The shots hit its armored hide, but they barely left a scorch mark. "Great," Jack muttered. "Of course, it's bulletproof." The creature turned toward them, its movements unnervingly quick for its size. Jack had fought a lot of things in his career, but this was something else. The fusion of organic and mechanical parts made it unpredictable and deadly. "Elena," Jack called, glancing at her as she crouched behind a fallen console. "Can you do that energy thing again?" Elena shook her head, fear etched on her face. "I don't know how. It just happened before." "Well, figure it out fast," Jack shouted, narrowly dodging another swipe from the creature's claws. He fired another volley of plasma shots, aiming for its joints, but the creature didn't slow down. The beast lunged, its massive arms swinging down toward Jack. He threw himself to the side, the impact of the blow cracking the floor where he had been standing. Jack rolled onto his back and pulled a grenade from his belt. He hurled it at the creature's face, the explosion sending a shower of sparks and debris through the air. The creature roared in pain, its metal plating scorched but intact. It reared back, preparing to strike again, when a sudden glow caught its attention. Elena's awakening. Elena stood, her small hands outstretched as a faint blue light began to emanate from her palms. Her expression was one of fear and determination, her glowing eyes locked on the creature. "Elena!" "No," Jack shouted. "Get back." But she didn't move. The light grew brighter, pulsating in time with the energy waves coming from the star crystal. The creature hesitated, its red eyes flickering as if it were sensing the threat. Then, with a guttural growl, it charged at her. "Elena!" Jack yelled, scrambling to his feet. He fired at the creature's legs, trying to slow it down, but it was relentless. Just as the beast was about to reach her, Elena unleashed a blinding surge of energy. The waves slammed into the creature, throwing it backward and sending it crashing into the far wall. The force of the blast was so strong that it cracked the walls and shattered several consoles. Jack shielded his eyes, the light fading as quickly as it had appeared. When he looked up, Elena was swaying on her feet, her face pale. "Elena!" He rushed to her side, catching her as she collapsed. "Hey, stay with me. You okay?" She nodded weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know I could do that." Jack gave her a grim smile. "Well, remind me not to get on your bad side." The revelation. Before Jack could say more, the pirate captain's voice cut through the room, filled with fury. "You think you've won. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Jack turned to see the captain standing near the star crystal, his hand resting on a control panel. The crystal's glow was intensifying, its energy building to a dangerous level. "You don't understand," the captain continued, his face twisted with anger and desperation. "This crystal isn't just a power source. It's alive. It's a sentient being. And it's waking up." Jack's blood ran cold. "Waking up? What the hell are you talking about?" The captain sneered. "You think it's just a tool. It's a god. And when it's fully awake, it will reshape the galaxy. All who stand in its way will be destroyed." Jack glanced at Elena, who was staring at the crystal with a mix of fear and awe. "Is he telling the truth?" he asked her. Elena nodded slowly. "It's alive. I can feel it. But it's angry. It doesn't want to be here." The crystal pulsed again, the shockwave stronger this time. The entire chamber shook, and cracks began to form in the walls. Alarms blared as the base's systems struggled to contain the growing energy. "Time to go," Jack muttered. He grabbed Elena's hand and pulled her toward the exit. The captain roared in defiance. "You can't escape. None of us can." Jack didn't look back. He had a sinking feeling the captain was right. The final showdown. The vagabond raced away from the pirate base, its engines screaming as Jack pushed them to their limits. Behind him, The station was collapsing in on itself, the star crystal's energy destabilizing its structure. Fiery explosions tore through the base as the black hole's gravity began to tear it apart. Elena sat strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her wide eyes fixed on the chaos outside. She was pale, her small hands gripping the armrests tightly. Jack glanced at her, his jaw set. "We're not out of this yet," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. "That black hole's pulling us in. I need you to focus." Elena turned to him, her voice trembling. "What do I do?" Jack adjusted the ship's trajectory, his fingers flying over the controls. "That energy you used back there, it's connected to the crystal, right? Can you feel it now?" Elena closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she nodded. "It's still there, but it's faint, like it's calling me." Jack frowned. "Calling you? What does that mean?" "It wants to escape," Elena said softly. "It doesn't want to destroy everything. It's just trying to survive." Jack swore under his breath. "Great. A sentient crystal with abandonment issues, just what we need." The pirate captain's last stand. Before Jack could say more, an alarm blared on the control panel. A massive ship appeared on the Vagabond sensors, its silhouette blocking out the stars. It was the pirate flagship, a hulking behemoth bristling with weapons. Jack recognized it immediately. "The captain's not done yet," he muttered. "Figures." The flagship opened fire, beams of energy slicing through the void. Jack jerked the controls, narrowly avoiding a direct hit. The Vagabond shuddered under the strain, warning lights flashing across the cockpit. "They're not letting us go without a fight," Jack said. He turned to Elena. "Hold on tight." The Vagabond twisted and rolled, dodging the incoming fire. Jack's years of experience as a pilot kept them one step ahead, but the pirate ship was relentless. Its weapons were designed to hunt and destroy, and Jack knew it was only a matter of time before they were cornered. "Can't shake them," he muttered. His mind raced for a solution, but nothing short of a miracle would save them now. The unexpected ally. Just as the flagship's weapons locked onto the Vagabond, another shockwave rippled through space. The star crystal's energy flared, brighter and more powerful than before. The collapsing pirate base erupted in a blinding explosion, and for a moment, the black hole's pull seemed to falter. Jack stared in awe as a massive energy field expanded from the crystal, engulfing the area. The flagship's weapons faltered, its systems disrupted by the sudden surge of power. "What just happened?" Elena asked, her voice shaking. Jack's eyes narrowed. "I think the crystal just bought us some time, but we need to make it count." He turned the Vagabond toward the flagship, his jaw set. "Hang on, kid. We're going in." Boarding the flagship, Jack maneuvered the Vagabond into the flagship's docking bay, slipping past its defenses in the chaos. The ship's interior was as massive and intimidating as its exterior, with armed guards rushing to regroup. Jack unbuckled his harness, grabbing his plasma pistol in gear. He turned to Elena. "Stay close, and don't touch anything unless I say so." Elena nodded, her small frame trembling but determined. "What's the plan?" "Simple," Jack said, checking his pistol. "We take down the captain and shut this thing down before it can blow us to bits." They moved through the corridors, sticking to the shadows. The flagship was a maze of metal and machinery, but Jack's instincts guided them. They encountered several guards along the way, but Jack's precision and Elena's quick thinking kept them moving forward. The captain's throne room. At last, they reached the heart of the ship, the captain's throne room. The massive chamber was bathed in red light, with a towering throne at its center. The pirate captain stood there, his armor gleaming, and his blade crackling with energy. Behind him, a secondary containment field pulsed with the same eerie glow as the star crystal. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," the captain sneered, his voice echoing through the chamber. "But this is where it ends." Jack stepped forward, his pistol aimed at the captain's chest. "Yeah, it ends with you letting us walk out of here, or what's left of you doesn't walk anywhere." The captain laughed, a deep, menacing sound. "You think you can stop me, bounty hunter? The crystal's power is mine now, and soon it will consume the entire sector." Jack's eyes flicked to the containment field. "You're not controlling it, are you? It's controlling you." The captain's grin faltered, but he quickly recovered. "It doesn't matter. I'll burn everything to ash before I let you win." He lunged, his energy blade slicing through the air. Jack dodged, firing several shots in quick succession. The captain deflected them effortlessly, his movements fast and precise. Jack gritted his teeth. This wasn't going to be easy. Elena's moment of truth. As Jack fought the captain, Elena edged closer to the containment field. The crystal's glow intensified as she approached, its energy resonating with her own. She placed her hands on the control panel, her small frame shaking. "Elena, what are you doing?" Jack shouted, narrowly avoiding another strike from the captain. "I can stop it," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "I can make it leave." Jack hesitated, his gut telling him this was a bad idea. But the look in Elena's eyes convinced him otherwise. "Do it, but be quick." Elena closed her eyes, her hands glowing as she connected with the crystal's energy. The room was filled with a brilliant light, and the crystal's pulse grew stronger. The captain turned, his expression shifting from fury to panic. "No, you can't take it from me," he roared, charging toward Elena. Jack intercepted him, tackling the captain to the ground. They grappled, trading blows as the room shook around them. The crystal's energy was reaching critical levels, and Jack knew they were running out of time. The final escape. Elena let out a cry as the crystal's energy surged, enveloping the room. The containment field shattered, and the crystal rose into the air, its glow blinding. The captain screamed in rage as the energy consumed him, his body disintegrating in an instant. Jack grabbed Elena, shielding her as the crystal's energy expanded outward. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, with a final pulse, the crystal vanished, leaving only an empty void where it had been. The flagship's systems began to fail, alarms blaring as the ship started to break apart. Jack pulled Elena to her feet. "Come on, kid, time to go." They sprinted back to the Vagabond, the ship shuddering as explosions tore through its hull. Jack fired up the engines, the vessel roaring to life as they blasted out of the docking bay. Behind them, the flagship was pulled into the black hole, its massive frame collapsing under the strain. The Vagabond barely escaped the gravitational pull, its systems struggling but holding steady. As they drifted into the safety of open space, Jack let out a long breath, slumping in his seat. Elena sat beside him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "It's over," she whispered. Jack glanced at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, kid, it's over." The promise fulfilled. The Vagabond floated in the calm expanse of space, the chaos of the pirate base and black hole far behind them. Jack leaned back in his chair, the adrenaline slowly fading as the silence settled in. His ship's systems were holding together, barely, but they were alive. For now, that was enough. Elena sat in the co-pilot's seat, her glowing blue eyes fixed on the starry void outside. She looked tired, her small hands resting on her lap, but there was a quiet determination in her expression. "Not bad for a kid," Jack said, breaking the silence. "You saved both our hides back there." Elena glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I just did what I felt." The crystal was hurting. It didn't want to be there. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Hurting? You mean that thing had feelings?" Elena nodded. "It wasn't evil, Jack. It was scared. Like me." Her words hung in the air, heavier than Jack expected. He wasn't the type to dwell on the metaphysical, but what she said made sense. The star crystal's energy had been erratic, unstable. Maybe it wasn't just a weapon. It was something more. The reunion. As the vagabond approached the coordinates Relic and Mira had given them, Elena grew more animated. She leaned forward, staring at the planet on the view screen. It was small, covered in shimmering green forests and glowing rivers, its atmosphere sparkling like a jewel. "That's home," Elena said softly, her voice filled with longing. "I didn't think I'd ever see it again." Jack guided the ship into the atmosphere, the planet's beauty striking even him. The vagabond touched down in a clearing near a cluster of crystalline structures that shimmered under the twin suns. Waiting at the edge of the clearing were Relic and Mira. The moment the ship's ramp lowered, Elena bolted out, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, Dad." Relic and Mira rushed forward, pulling their daughter into their arms. Their shimmering skin glowed brighter with emotion, their eyes wet with tears of joy. Jack hung back, leaning against the ship's hull. He wasn't great with emotional reunions. Relic approached him after a moment, his expression solemn but grateful. "We owe you everything, Jack Hunter. You kept your promise." Jack shrugged, trying to downplay the weight of what he'd done. "Just doing my job." Mira stepped forward, holding a small glowing artifact in her hands. It was a star crystal, smaller and less intense than the one Jack had encountered on the pirate base, but its energy was unmistakable. "This is for you," Mira said. "A gift. It will grant you whatever you desire most." That was our promise. The temptation. Jack stared at the crystal, its glow reflecting in his eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. The idea of a wish, a true, limitless wish, was tempting. He thought about everything he could have. Wealth, power, immortality. All the things a man like him had spent his life chasing. But then he thought about the cost. He'd seen what unchecked power could do. The pirates had been consumed by their greed, and the star crystal's energy had nearly destroyed them all. Jack wasn't sure he wanted that kind of responsibility. "What's the catch?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. Mira shook her head. "There is no catch. The crystal simply reflects your deepest desire. It will give you what your heart truly wants." Jack chuckled dryly. "That's the problem. I'm not sure I know what I want anymore." Relic placed a hand on Jack's shoulder. "Then perhaps the answer will come when you least expect it. The crystal is yours to keep. Use it when the time feels right." Jack hesitated but eventually took the crystal, its warmth spreading through his hand. It felt alive, like it was waiting for him to decide. He tucked it into his pack, giving Relic and Mira a nod. The farewell. As the vagabond prepared to take off, Elena ran back to Jack, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Jack ruffled her hair, a rare smile crossing his face. "You're a tough kid, Elena. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." She hugged him tightly, catching him off guard. For a moment, Jack froze, then awkwardly patted her back. All right. Don't go getting all sentimental on me." Relic and Mira stood nearby, watching with smiles. As Jack climbed into the vagabond, Relic called out, "May the stars guide you, Jack Hunter. And remember, you always have a home here." Jack nodded, closing the ramp. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting off the planet and heading back into the stars. The twist. Hours later, as the vagabond drifted through space, Jack sat in the cockpit, staring at the small star crystal resting on the console. It pulsed faintly, as if aware of his hesitation. "What do I even want?" he muttered to himself. His mind wandered to his past, to the people he'd lost, the mistakes he'd made, and the life he'd chosen. For so long, he'd thought his desires were simple: money, survival, freedom. But now, he wasn't so sure. The crystal glowed brighter, and for a fleeting moment, Jack thought he saw something. A vision of a life he'd never had. A family, a home, peace. He shook his head, snapping out of it. "Nah," he said to himself. "That's not me." But as he tucked the crystal away, A small part of him wondered if, one day, he'd change his mind.